Well, the internet is a marvelous tool, and when I thought about law versus grace, I simply had to go to see if there were some foolish laws that are still on the books. And of course, they list them according to state. So I picked the states in the Midwest because that's where I grew up. Did you know that it's illegal to fish for whales in Nebraska? Or did you know it's illegal to get fish drunk in Ohio? Or in my own home state, you know that one-armed piano players cannot charge a fee? Don't you wonder who thinks up these rules? And then they have the audacity to put them through the legislature of the states in which they exist, and they become law. And I would be more than surprised if anyone were ever arrested for any one of these violations. But if you go on the internet, you can scroll down with every single state in the union, and there will be an absurd law that someone thought ought to be on the books. And they didn't get it there without expecting that people would observe it. Now, I can assure you that no one has broken that law in Nebraska. Nobody has been fishing for whales in Nebraska. But then I went further and I thought about not just the Pharisees, because in the Old Testament, the Pharisees take it on the chin all the time because they're the keepers of the law, and they exact the penalties that go with breaking the law. But then I thought, I'll bet there are Christian churches who have rules and regulations that are simply as absurd as the rules and regulations for the state. You ought to go on sometime just to see what some Christian communities hold to be so important in their life. For example, in one of the communities I looked up, single women are not allowed to own homes. Where does this come from? Or another one, for example, is that young men are supposed to wear pants loose enough so that if they put a ping pong ball in their belt loop, it drops out the bottom of their trousers. Who in the name of Christ has thought of these things as being essential to the faith? Isn't this the weirdest kind of expression of Christianity that you can imagine? And single men and single women are not allowed to drive cars. Friends, how do we get to the point where some people in the name of Christ think they need to make these kinds of rules and regulations, and if they are broken, you are being unfaithful to the good news? I'm astounded when I read these things, because it just seemed to me that somehow they missed the whole point of what Jesus was trying to say and do as he journeyed throughout Judea and Galilee. Sure, he talked about the importance of keeping the commandments, but he never specified how one does that, nor how those commandments seem to keep playing out in the lives of people. When he said, "I have not come to break the law, I have come to fulfill the law." And how did he do that? Think about the life and the ministry of Christ and how it connects with our daily living. When we really consider how much Jesus cared about the people of his day, can we not somehow extrapolate that to our own lives and our own daily existence? If Jesus was so caring, compassionate, and kind as he went around the countryside of Judea and Galilee, is he not caring, compassionate, and kind in terms of our own personal life journeys? When he said, "I have not come to diminish the law, but to fulfill it," he understood exactly what God's plan was for the human family. On every occasion that he could, he actually talked about how central to our spiritual journeys it is to know that God loves us and that we are called to love one another, even as Jesus has expressed that in his interpersonal encounters throughout the New Testament. I have come that you might love one another, even as I have loved you. Do you know that God's expression of the creation and God's expression of care and concern for each one of us, if it is not rooted and grounded in love, it will have no transforming power. Because we know that in this world, fear and guilt simply do not carry the day. When churches make up rules and regulations that diminish the sacred worth of each person, they are flying in the face of what Jesus has said to us again and again in the New Testament. It's fun to look at the rules and regulations that are passed by state legislatures somewhere, but when you see what some Christian communities try to do to conform the human family into one way of looking at life. You know, I have been a pastor over 50 years. I know when I share the good news of Jesus Christ, I am speaking to individuals in this congregation or wherever I have been appointed. You are all on your way in a spiritual journey, and there are no two spiritual journeys in this sanctuary that are the same. Your life experiences, the things that happen to you on the way, the encounters you have in life, always impact and affect you individually and personally. And I think Jesus understood that, and that's why Jesus spoke so often about love, because it is a universal. It simply says that you and every one of God's children are precious in God's sight. And love is the power by which we really find our true being, our true purpose. I said this morning that it seems like it's law versus grace. You know, grace is that way that God has of communicating to us in the most difficult circumstances of life that God cares about us. That's what grace is. In the most difficult situations of life, God's grace finds a way to break in and say, you are precious to me. I care about you, and I am with you. Jesus was the perfect exemplar of that. As he encountered people in every strata of his social world, again and again and again, he was a vehicle by which God's grace touched a life that needed to know that whatever was happening to them was not God's punishment, that God does not function that way in our personal journeys. We are human and we are frail and we do fail. But God always is trying to work for our good in those circumstances. Law can never do that. The legalism of some of the rules and regulations that churches think are self-important fall far short of conveying to us how loving and caring our Creator is and how much that was expressed to each of us in Jesus Christ. Grace, friends, God's grace, far beyond our expectation. It is always a gift to help us pull together again, to help us be restored and renewed and made new again. And that is why Jesus talked in the gospel about, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Because as salt has its tastiness, it has a purpose. Light is here to drive out the darkness. And what did Jesus say about himself? I am the light of the world. I have come that you might not live in darkness. And so it is that the only way we know that there is a light beyond us, waiting for us to be embraced by it, is because God's grace is seen. God's care, God's compassion, God's understanding. and it is an expression of God's love for us. It doesn't mean that we have carte blanche and do whatever we please with and to each other. Because if we truly understand what God was at work doing in Jesus Christ, it sets the stage for the most positive, helpful, and hopeful human relationships that we can possibly have. If we look at the way Jesus shared the grace, love of God with the people of his own time, and with us as well, because if we could give testimony, all of us have experienced the grace of God in a difficult moment of our lives. That is the way God seeks to work in us and through us. So when Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world," he was confirming for each and every one of us that the grace of God is sufficient for every human need. Whatever may be the situation in this moment, whatever may be the situation next week or next month or next year or wherever, the grace of God will be there for us. And the healing and renewing presence of God's Spirit will bless us. You are the light of the world. You are the salt